So this next one is submitted from Justin Etre. Again, forgive me if I brutalize any pronunciations. And this one is called Bad Snacks. And so I'm going to go ahead and mute it up and play this track.
I knew all along, I knew I drew the lines 9 times before. On my hands to protect from unwitting demands. I knew from the now it's time to say goodnight. You don't wanna say goodbye.
All right.
I don't know about you guys, but I want to go first on this one. This was nothing short of fantastic as far on my end. Note I put in my phone was sounded like Elliott Smith and David Byrne hanging out at the Neutral Milk Hotel while the Avalanches play by the pool. So it kind of had that like singer-songwriter going with the Elliott Smith and the David Byrne. Kind of had that weird kind of just sound that Neutral Milk Hotel puts out, but it had that cool kind of like break beats that the Avalanches would sample. I'm just trying to put together what kind of genre that was, and I want to know what your influences are. But besides that, it was I don't know what to say. I loved it. I'm gonna go listen to it again.
All right, just make sure you pay attention to the stream for the next one, Jordan.
Okay, will do.
I love the song too. I don't know what I was expecting by something called Bad Snacks. That wasn't it, but I loved it. I love the like different instrumentation and stuff going on. I love the ideas. The vocal was like, again, like just not what I was expecting, but I loved it. Just in like the delivery and how it was performed. Something I wasn't sure worked super well. It sounded to me like there were sort of two low end drums going on. One sounded a bit like a concert bass drum, and one was almost more like a low level, like electronic kick drum. And I'm not sure the two are working that well together. I'm not sure if it's a timing thing or a tuning thing. I don't know. My suggestion would be maybe experiment instead of a concert bass drum, go with like a more pitched drum, like a timpani or something like that, because they're just kind of fighting each other for space and you're not really hearing the rhythm of either drum at the same time. So I'll pass it on to the next person now.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm not sure if it works or doesn't work. There was like a push pull, so it was making me feel awkward and uncomfortable, and I'm not too sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Yeah, there was part of me that was going, "Oh," and then there's another part of me that was going, "Wow, that's interesting. That's really fucked up." So yeah, it's yeah, I might have to give it a few more listens, but it was really, really good, really, really good, and it was just
maybe it was trying to make you feel like you had a bad snack.
Yeah, it put me on an edge, made me feel uncomfortable, which I think is a good thing in some stuff. You know? I don't know. I'll pass it on.
Go for it, Tim. Oh, you're muted.
You're muted, Tim.
Like this.
I
just made myself massive on my screen and didn't unmute myself. That was stupid. Yeah, I really like that as well. That had a very sort of James Blake cinematic orchestra kind of vibe to it. I like that sort of quirky and unusual vibe in music. Mix-wise, the things that popped out to me while we were listening then was the kick that comes in right at the beginning. When the rest of the band, if you like, are in, that kick sounds fantastic. But when it's at the beginning, when the kick was on its own and the music was a lot sparser, it sounded very separate to the rest of the instruments. And I'm not entirely sure why that would be, but myself, if I was mixing that, I'd tweak that bass drum sound a little bit when it's a lot more exposed like that. I think the vocals were fantastic, like really dynamic and sort of really emotional delivery as a result of that dynamic in the vocal. They were nice and loud in the mix. I like a nice loud vocal. And the bass sound, someone touched on the bass earlier, really nice, deep, round bass sound doing the job that the bass should be doing. But with the cello loop that was in there, it sounded at times like there was a tuning thing going on. I'm not entirely sure if it was tuning or a microtonal thing, and I've just heard it wrong, but there's little clashes here and there. The rallentendo at the end was fantastic. That little slowdown was lovely. And looking at the waveform while it was playing, it looked like the tops of those waves are already, like the thing's already been compressed a touch. If you're going for marshalling, obviously push that a little bit more. I like to mix into a compressor, and it looked like you've done that already. But yeah, great work. I really, really enjoyed that.
Yeah, this is a kind of song that's really hard to provide mixed feedback on because it doesn't fit a typical mold. Like if somebody's going for a rock tune or a pop tune or a rap tune, there's some pretty obvious conventions and kind of like tropes that are tried and true. But this is one of those songs where literally the whole thing is a work of art. So, my feedback is going to be as subjective as the next person's. And I really dug the track. Like Wayne said, it makes you feel something. Like throughout the whole thing, there's a raw emotion. So as a song itself, I was super stoked about it. I could almost see it as like a scoring cue where like there's some kind of chaos and beauty going on. From a engineering mix standpoint, really my feedback again is going to be very subjective, but I think that it gets very muddled, like intentionally so towards the end. But I think there's a little too much chaos going on for me. So if confusion is the main point, then nailed it because it's a cacophony of sound. For me personally, I think I would have liked to had. It sounded like there was either multiple cellos or multiple violins going at the same time, and they were both occupying very much the centered space. It sounded like they were stereo tracked, but they were still very centered in nature. And so I think there could be layers of separation in that to pull them out so it's still a cacophony of sound, but I've got more distinct things I can follow. Instead of it being a centered mush, it's kind of a more panned out. But again, that's completely just my own perspective. Go for it, Dan.
Yeah, I just want to say this is a perfect example of when you're mixing and you want to make a lot of things fit together. You don't necessarily want every single thing to sound amazing on its own. Like, you need to carve out frequency space and dynamic space for them. And like, as a whole, they still sound good. But if you were to solo like one violin or one cello, it wouldn't sound good on its own. And that's okay. And, you know, if there are times when, you know, maybe that cello or that violin that doesn't sound good anymore when everything is together is on its own and you need it to sound good, well, then you just split the tracks, or you can automate your EQ to have two different EQs of that same instrument for different sections of the song. So I think that's just like a perfect example of like a really common thing where, like, you know, you go to one of these big name mixers like CLA and you solo a guitar track, like a rhythm guitar track, and it's carved out to shit to fit in with everything else, and it sounds like crap on its own, but it sounds great in the mix. So that's something to keep in mind, is like, just don't mix in solo.
Yep. And yeah, I have to judge the track as a whole. And I think it accomplished what I believe the artist was going for, which is this evolving, growing, chaotic emotion that starts cleaner but gets muddled and then breathes at the end. I like the dynamic release of it because it definitely goes somewhere. So from a production standpoint, I like how it ramps up. You got all this stuff going on, and then it's like whew, we get a chance to breathe for a second. And that's why I say it's. I can't really judge it based on a standard other than on its own and just things that I might do. Like the only last thing I will say about it is that, you know, the bass was great. My personal preference would be it was very bottom end heavy, and I like to have maybe a little more of the top, like, you know, maybe some of that 1176 grit just to make it stand out a little bit more. That's going back to my everything's kind of mushed together. But again, if the whole point was to have that chaotic clump, I think you nailed it. So that's all I'll say about it is it's really preferential. There's so many different ways that this piece could have gone. Also, it's awesome.
I've got two final things. Please keep submitting and please reach out. So I would love to work together. It was beautiful.
Yeah, and on that point, when these songs are done and released, please let us know. I'd be happy to both promote good music, but also just to see, you know, where the songs may have changed or become better or evolved because of some of this feedback. So it'd be awesome to see follow-ups on all of this stuff.
I just have a couple other small little points I want to get to before we move on to the next one. One of them is mixing related. So in the beginning, there was this like guitar line happening on the right side, I'm pretty sure, and I really liked it. And then it came back again later, but I almost didn't hear it because it was so low in the mix. So I think that's another like automation opportunity just to make sure that doesn't get lost, because it's a great, interesting little line that gets lost. And I would love to hear just a little bit more of it so that it grabs your attention and moves you away from it. And then the other thing is near the end, there's that cymbal roll going on. Like, it's like mallets on a cymbal. And just to me, like, I have a lot of experience with classical music and I've heard a million cymbal rolls. And I would just say that like the one you have sort of goes up and down and back up again before it fades out. And it takes a long time to do that. So I would say maybe just get a swell that, you know, goes in one direction for the whole time until you want it to fade out, or just fade it out faster. But the like up and down cymbal swell is, it doesn't really work for me, at least in my experience. But again, that's also a personal preference thing. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, you reminded me of another element at the end, which was interesting, where it almost sounds like somebody brushed cloth up against the microphones, like a whoosh. And it's one of those things where my first inclination is like, oh, you got to take that out. That's clearly a mistake. But then when I, you know, shut up and go, well, that was probably a very intentional part of the sound because it is about chaos and organicness. So who am I to say cut out what sounded like maybe somebody brushed up on the mic and just leave it? You know, it makes part of the tune. So Um, if it was a mistake, it sounded cool. If it wasn't, it still sounded cool. So that's one of those things. Like as Wayne brought up earlier with his Green Day example, sometimes there's things in there that are imperfect, but those imperfections really make it unique because now we had something that caught on to us. We're like, oh, that's interesting. If I didn't have anything to say about it, well, then you kind of failed because I wasn't that interested in your piece.
I would love to bring up a really famous example of that, and that would be the cough that was left in on "Wish You Were Here."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. The older I get, the more I like the things that make it stand out and are unique. I used to be gotta make it perfect and everything's gotta be clean and I'm gonna denoise this, and I just don't do it anymore. I find that it just has better life if you just leave it, like let it be.
Yeah, another good example of that sort of stuff is last Led Zeppelin album. You can hear John Bonham breathing and playing the drums, which is evident if you get the files of him just playing the drums. It's crazy how much you can hear him breathe. And also on that note, stuff like Yo-Yo Ma, where he's playing the cello, you can like really hear him breathing. It's just sort of like you would think that you'd want to take that out, but it just adds to the realness and the authenticity of the whole thing.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up Led Zeppelin, Wayne, because I was actually thinking of another Led Zeppelin example. There's that one song, the name is escaping me now, but it was on one of their first few albums where you, like, as soon as you hear the squeak of the kick drum pedal, you can never listen to that song again because it's infinitely ruined. So, like, yes, I generally love those little things that you hear, but not
Yeah.
always. Not always.
I was
Yeah.
going to mention that exact thing, that squeaky bass drum, and I'm sure there's one of the Nirvana ones. I think it might be on Bleach. It's one of the earlier fellas. You can hear the drum stool. He's got a creaky drum stool. You can hear him creaking around that. It just, as you said, it makes things real. And that imperfections, timing things, tuning things, weird little sounds. The odd little one makes things real and human. It makes music good to listen to. Totally agree with that.
Yep. I personally think that all music production is like a swinging pendulum. Like there goes through trends and things come and things go, and we went from completely raw to, oh wow, this is polished, and like some of the like the grungy stuff went from like nasty to really clean and super produced, and then people are like, well, screw that, let's make it dirty and nasty again. And now we've gone through a phase where everything's got to be beat sliced and quantized samples and all that, and I think that we're starting to see a more swing back. We're like, okay, we did that, now we want to bring some of the life back in. So I think we're going to see a resurgence in bringing back some of that natural in certain genres. Obviously, some genres are naturally inorganic, and that's fine the way they are. I'll be clear that I don't think there's a right or wrong. I have a preference, but clearly music reaches out to different people in different ways.